The descent through the planet's atmosphere was turbulent. The vessel shuddered under the pressure of re-entry, atmospheric heat streaking the windows in brilliant orange flares. The alien students, secured in their harnesses, watched wide-eyed as the swirling clouds below parted, revealing the vast expanse of the Amazon rainforest. To the untrained eye, it was beautiful, a never-ending sea of green, its canopies stretching unbroken to the horizon. Rivers snaked through the jungle like veins of silver, glinting in the sunlight. But to Professor Zaleth, it was a warning. He had studied this planet for years. Where his students saw splendor, he saw shadows teeming with ancient, hungry things. The ship landed in a clearing, steam hissing as the hydraulic legs settled into the earth. The moment the hatch opened, the air poured in, a thick, stifling wave of moisture and the pungent smell of life and decay. The students winced and adjusted the filters in their suits, though it did little to mask the sensory assault. Tilara was the first to step out, her tri-lensed eyes blinking in astonishment. "It's alive," she murmured, as the forest canopy buzzed with insect wings, the distant cries of birds and the rustle of unseen creatures. Professor Zaleth stepped past her, his tall form imposing as he surveyed the tree line. "Remember why we are here," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Observe, document, but never forget. We are intruders in a world that does not welcome us." The team moved out, instruments humming as they scanned the biodiversity surrounding them. Their sleek silver suits shimmered in the sunlight, an alien contrast against the tangled green and brown of Earth's foliage. Data scrolled across their visors, highlighting plant species, temperatures, and movement patterns. At first, the jungle seemed passive, a breathing monument to evolution's unrelenting creativity. But as they progressed deeper, the air grew heavier, as if the forest itself were pressing down on them. An hour into their trek, they reached the river. The water churned lazily, thick with sediment. Small fish flicked in the shallows, their scales reflecting faint rainbows in the light. Threx knelt to take a sample, but his fingers froze mid-motion. "What is that?" he whispered. The others turned to follow his gaze. Along the opposite bank, a massive caiman, nearly 5 meters long, was dragging a thrashing anaconda into the water. The snake coiled desperately around the reptile's armored body, its muscles bulging in a final effort to crush its predator. But the caiman's jaws held firm, teeth embedded deep in the serpent's flesh. With a final snap, the anaconda's body went limp, vanishing beneath the murky water. The students watched in stunned silence. On their home planet, predators didn't fight. They hunted with precision and lethality, free from desperation or brutality. This was different. This was raw. "Fascinating," Ryx muttered, though his body language betrayed his unease. Even their apex predators must wage war to survive. Tilara turned away, uncomfortable. "Can we move on?" she asked, her voice strained. Zaleth nodded, but as they began to walk, Tilara hesitated, her gaze caught by a flash of movement deeper in the jungle. She raised her scanner and stepped toward a nearby tree. "Wait. I think I saw..." The team barely noticed her slipping away. She advanced slowly, captivated by a small bird with iridescent blue feathers perched on a low branch. It chirped twice and hopped closer. Then the branch beneath it shifted. No, writhed. Before Talara could react, the tree trunk erupted with motion. A writhing mass of black ants spilled from the bark, falling in a waterfall of segmented legs and clicking mandibles. They poured down the tree in a living torrent, swarming over a nearby rodent sniffing at the base. Talara's breath caught as she watched in horror. Within seconds, the creature was consumed, its fur and skin dissolving under the onslaught of thousands of tiny jaws. Its muffled squeals stopped as bare bone gleamed wetly beneath the mass. A hand grabbed her shoulder, yanking her back. She stumbled into Ryx, her chest heaving. What was that?" she gasped. "Army ants," Zaleth said grimly, stepping forward to pull her farther away from the writhing swarm. "A superorganism. They can strip a creature 10 times your size to bone in minutes. Alone, they're nothing. Together, they're an unstoppable force of nature." Talara stared at the gleaming bones that were all that remained of the rodent, bile rising in her throat. The jungle, once majestic, now felt suffocating. Every shadow was alive, every leaf a threat. "We need to regroup," Zaleth ordered, his voice sharp. The rest of the students hurried back, their once eager faces pale and strained. As they resumed their trek, the noises of the forest seemed louder, closer. The snapping of branches, the hum of wings, the distant growl of something unseen. The group walked tighter now, closer together, as if their proximity could shield them from the horrors hidden in the trees. Talara's fingers brushed against her arm, where one of the ants had crawled beneath her suit's seal before she was pulled away. She winced as she crushed it between her fingers, its tiny body releasing a foul-smelling paste. Her skin felt raw where it had bitten her. "Are you all right?" Ryx asked, glancing at her. Talara nodded too quickly. "I'm fine." But her gaze kept darting to the underbrush, expecting more black shapes to come rushing out. By the time they reached the next clearing, the sun had begun to sink, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward them like fingers. The light was softer now, golden and gentle, but none of them took comfort in it. Zaleth stopped and turned to address the group. "This was only the first hour. Remember this moment. On Earth, it's not always the beasts you see that will kill you. It's the ones you never notice." No one spoke. In the jungle behind them, something watched. A pair of glassy black eyes blinked slowly, tracking their every movement as they pressed forward, unaware that the true nightmare had only begun. The river narrowed as they followed its course deeper into the forest. Vines hung low, brushing their helmets like skeletal fingers. The air was stifling, filled with the chorus of unseen creatures. Their breathing, though regulated by their suits, felt labored beneath the crushing humidity. Professor Zaleth paused at the river's edge, consulting his scanner. "We're close," he muttered. His finger traced a fissure in the riverbank, a dark wound in the earth where the water gurgled downward into shadow. The entrance to the subterranean cavern yawned before them, exhaling a cold, wet draft that carried the metallic tang of stone and something else. Ryx peered into the darkness, his visor adjusting to filter out the glare of sunlight. "You're sure there's something worth studying down there?" Zaleth's eyes, pale and calculating, fixed on the abyss. Life thrives where logic says it shouldn't. The deeper you go, the more the rules unravel. The team activated their lamps, beams of sterile white light piercing the gloom as they descended into the cave. Water dripped in slow, rhythmic beats from the ceiling, splattering onto the jagged stone below. The walls shimmered with damp moss and strange, pale growths. The deeper they went, the more the temperature dropped. Their visors fogged slightly, even with thermal regulators compensating. Tilara shivered, not from the cold, but from the weight of the earth pressing down on them. She had always felt uneasy underground, and this place felt wrong, like a tomb that had been forgotten for a reason. The tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber. The river had carved a pool at its center, its surface smooth as glass. Their lights cast eerie reflections that shimmered and twisted in the ripples. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like the fangs of some great, slumbering beast. Tilara took a cautious step forward, her boots splashing in the shallow water near the edge. "Look at this," she whispered, pointing to something faintly glowing beneath the surface. Pale, boneless shapes drifted lazily in the water. They were unlike any aquatic species they'd documented, gelatinous bodies with pulsing sacs of faint bioluminescence. Their forms were almost hypnotic, moving like ribbons in slow motion. Rex crouched beside her, fascinated. Incredible. They're using luminescence to navigate in total darkness. He reached out with a sampling probe, lowering it toward one of the creatures. Before Zaleth could stop him, the water erupted. A massive form shot upward, too fast to register until it was too late. The creature struck with horrifying precision, its translucent maw unhinging to an impossible width. Rows of needle-thin teeth gleamed in the pale light as it clamped down on Ryx's arm and shoulder, dragging him into the pool with a bone-rattling splash. Tilara screamed, the sound muffled in her helmet as she stumbled back. Ryx thrashed beneath the surface, the creature's eel-like body coiling around him in a grotesque embrace. Its bioluminescent organs pulsed, illuminating the horrifying scene in flashes of blue and green. His suit's structural plating buckled under the pressure as the creature's jaws tightened. "Get him out!" Zaleth's voice cut through the chaos as he sprinted toward the edge. One of the students, Ron, dove in without hesitation, his suit thrusters activating in short bursts to propel him through the water. His gloved hand grabbed Reeks's shoulder and yanked hard, but the creature refused to let go. Reeks's visor cracked. Blood streamed from his nose as the pressure built inside his skull. His suit alarms blared in short, panicked bursts. His muffled scream gurgled through the audio feed before his body went rigid. The eel's translucent flesh bulged unnaturally as its teeth sank deeper. Then, with a sickening crack, Ryx's left arm severed at the shoulder, sending a cloud of blood spiraling through the water like ink. Ron hauled Ryx's limp form out of the pool, dragging him onto the slick rock. Tilara knelt beside him, frantically adjusting his suit's emergency pressure seals, but his remaining arm hung motionless. His skin was pale beneath the visor, eyes glazed with shock. "He's gone." Tilara's voice wavered as she stared at Ryx's lifeless form. Zaleth slammed his fist into the stone floor. "Damn it!" His voice echoed through the cavern, a hollow sound swallowed by the shadows. Behind them, the water churned again. The creature had surfaced, its elongated body shimmering with bioluminescent veins. Its head resembled a deep-sea predator, but its size was monstrous. Mandible-like extensions quivered around its jaws, sensing vibrations. "We need to move," Zaleth barked. "There could be more." As if summoned by his words, another shape emerged from the far side of the pool, a second creature, its pale eyes blinking lazily as it glided toward the shallows. Ron's breathing grew ragged. "We're trapped." "No, we're not." Tilara's voice hardened, her fear giving way to instinct. She grabbed one of their supply packs and yanked it open, pulling out a phosphorus charge used for flare illumination. "Back up!" She hurled the flare into the pool. It detonated with a blinding flash of white light, the phosphorus sizzling as it spread across the surface. The creatures recoiled, their sensitive bodies writhing as the chemical burn spread. "Go!" Zaleth shouted. The team scrambled toward a narrow side passage, their lamps flickering as static interference buzzed through their suit systems. The tunnel was narrow and jagged, forcing them to crawl single file. The walls scraped against their suits, and the sound of rushing water grew louder as they pressed forward. The creatures' distant shrieks echoed behind them, distorted by the winding passage. Tilara's heart pounded as they emerged into another chamber, a sloping exit where sunlight filtered faintly from above. Relief washed over her, but it was fleeting. She could still hear Rex's last scream in her mind, feel the cold spray of water and blood. The forest greeted them once again, warm and indifferent. They collapsed onto the moss-covered ground, breathing heavily. Ron broke the silence, his voice hoarse. What was that thing? Zaleth stared back into the dark mouth of the cave, his expression grim. A predator shaped by isolation and hunger, one that's been evolving in darkness for millennia. Tilara wiped the blood from her visor with trembling fingers. We were never meant to find it, and it was never meant to see the light. The group fell silent as the forest's sounds resumed. Birdsong, distant insect hums, an unnerving reminder that, to the jungle, their loss was meaningless. Life would move on, indifferent to their fear and grief. As the shadows of the trees deepened, Tilara looked at her shaking hands and whispered to herself, "We shouldn't have come here." The jungle had begun to change. The towering green canopy thinned as the terrain shifted upward, giving way to strange twisted trees with crimson leaves that rustled like whispers in the wind. The humid, earthy scent of the jungle was replaced by something cloyingly sweet, like decaying fruit left too long in the sun. Tilara's visor registered elevated pollen levels, but the scans couldn't identify the composition. Strange spores drifted lazily through the air, catching the light in bursts of red and gold. The sight would have been beautiful if it hadn't felt so wrong. "We should stop and recalibrate the filtration systems," Zaleth announced, his voice tense. He didn't like the way the pollen clung to their suits. Even with their advanced filtration, the density of organic particles was far beyond what they'd prepared for. The group slowed, scanning their surroundings. The underbrush was sparse here, replaced by thick red flowers growing in clusters as far as the eye could see. Their petals shimmered in shades of ruby and vermilion, releasing faint puffs of spores with every shift of the breeze. Tilara knelt to examine one of the blooms. Her sensors hummed with confusion, struggling to categorize the biological signatures. It's not a fungus, but it's not just a flower either. Ron shifted uneasily. Whatever it is, I don't like it. Look how fast it's spreading. The group's trail was already dusted with fine crimson powder, marking their path like a scar through the landscape. Their boots left faint imprints that were quickly swallowed as more spores drifted down. Threx wandered ahead, drawn by the alien beauty of the clearing. His visor's readout flashed warnings about the concentration levels of airborne particles, but he ignored them. He reached out, brushing a hand against the soft petals of a particularly large bloom. "Threx, don't!" Tilara's voice cracked through the comms. But it was too late. The moment his fingers touched the bloom, the flower shivered, releasing a thick cloud of scarlet spores. Threx stumbled back, coughing inside his helmet as the cloud enveloped him. His visor fogged, his breathing ragged. "Seal your secondary filters," Zaleth ordered. Threx's eyes widened in terror as he slapped at the seals on his suit. The spores clung to him, sliding down the seams of his suit like liquid dust. A high-pitched alarm blared in his headset as his biometrics spiked. Then he screamed. The sound was primal, tearing through the group like a physical blow. Threx collapsed to his knees, clutching his helmet as veins of dark red bloomed beneath his skin. His body convulsed, muscles jerking in unnatural spasms. The spores weren't just an irritant, they were invading him, spreading through his bloodstream like wildfire. "Get him back!" Zaleth shouted, rushing forward. Tilara grabbed Threx's arm but recoiled as she felt something shift beneath his suit. A slick, wet bulge pressing against the fabric. The flesh beneath his skin was moving. Threx's back arched violently, his mouth open in a silent scream as a ridge of fungal growth erupted along his spine. Crimson stalks pushed through the gaps in his armor, blooming like flowers in grotesque mockery of life. His helmet cracked as the pressure built, his face twisting in agony. Tilara stumbled back, bile rising in her throat. "No, no!" Ron grabbed her shoulder, pulling her away. "We can't help him." Zaleth clenched his jaw, his eyes burning with helpless fury. He activated the emergency incinerator on his gauntlet, a last resort tool meant for sterilization. The small flame flickered for a second before roaring to life. "Forgive me, Threx," Zaleth whispered, and he released the flame. The fire engulfed Threx's body, the fungal growths hissing and popping as they blackened and withered. His convulsions slowed, then ceased. The acrid smell of burning spores filled the clearing. Tilara turned away, tears streaming down her face. She couldn't bear to watch. When the flames died, all that remained was charred armor and ash. The group stood in stunned silence, the weight of what had happened pressing down on them like a physical force. The jungle around them swayed gently, as if breathing. The flowers shivered, releasing more harmless-looking clouds of red dust that danced in the golden light. "We need to move," Zaleth said finally, his voice hollow. "Before more of this, whatever it is, spreads." Ron hesitated. "And if it's already inside us?" No one answered. They trudged onward, avoiding the flowers as best they could. The path ahead twisted through dense clusters of crimson blooms, forcing them to hold their breath and move quickly. Their suits hissed with every step as the filtration systems struggled to keep up. Tilara's thoughts raced. Threx's death hadn't been random. This wasn't an accident of biology. These flowers weren't just passive organisms. They had evolved for this. They were designed to spread by making hosts. A shiver ran down her spine as she looked at her gloved hands, remembering how quickly the spores had coated Threx. She felt a phantom itch beneath her skin and clenched her fists to suppress the panic. Minutes passed in tense silence until the clearing gave way to more familiar jungle growth. The flowers began to thin, replaced by the rough green of ferns and low trees. The air felt fresher, the pollen clouds fading. Tilara slowed, breathing deeply as her suit's alarms quieted. She turned to look back at the clearing, half expecting the flowers to follow them. But they remained, swaying gently as though satisfied. The team collapsed onto a patch of moss near a fallen tree, exhausted and numb. Tilara's voice was barely a whisper. They weren't just plants. They wanted to spread. Zaleth sat beside her, his face shadowed. Nature doesn't want. It adapts. And these blooms have adapted to thrive by consuming anything that breathes. Rain wiped the sweat from his brow, his eyes wide with lingering fear. If we stay here, we'll become part of it. Zaleth nodded grimly. Then we leave. We don't stop until we're clear of this zone. No more detours, no more collecting samples. The group moved again, their bodies weary but driven by a deeper instinct, the will to survive. Behind them, the clearing of red flowers stretched out like a living wound, pulsing gently in the dying light. Tilara felt the itch again beneath her skin, but said nothing. She forced herself to focus on the path ahead, refusing to look down. The jungle whispered around them as they pressed forward, as if reminding them that their time here was borrowed, and every step they took only deepened their debt. The jungle grew darker as the sun dipped below the horizon. Long shadows spread like wounds through the trees, twisting every shape into something unfamiliar. The survivors trudged forward in silence, their bodies aching from the trek, their minds shattered by what they had witnessed. Tilara kept her gaze low, watching the uneven ground to avoid slipping on the vines that tangled beneath her boots. Her breath was shallow, every step accompanied by the phantom sensation of spores beneath her skin. She wanted to believe they had escaped the worst of it, but Earth never let them forget. It always had more to show. Zaleth raised a hand, signaling for the group to stop. The path ahead sloped upward, leading to a jagged outcropping where the forest thinned, revealing a plateau bathed in silver moonlight. "We'll make our final signal here," he announced. His voice was hoarse, almost broken. "Extraction is coming." Ron let out a sigh of relief and collapsed against a tree. Finally. He glanced up at the night sky, though the stars offered no comfort. "I just want to get off this cursed planet." Tilara knelt beside a twisted root, adjusting her suit's beacon to strengthen the transmission signal. "If they're even listening," she muttered. "They will be," Zaleth said. His gaze was fixed on the far edge of the plateau, where the trees parted to reveal an expanse of shimmering grass. The moonlight danced across the blades, making them look like silver waves in a dark sea. Tilara followed his gaze and froze. There was something wrong. The grass wasn't swaying with the wind. It was shifting unnaturally, rippling in a circular pattern. Then it moved. The grass seemed to rise and twist, coiling into a massive form that took slow, deliberate steps into the moonlight. The thing that emerged from the grass was colossal. At first, Tilara thought it was a jaguar, a predator of this world's natural order. But no jaguar should have looked like this. Its body was sleek but wrong, its fur interrupted by plates of hardened chitin that caught the light like shards of obsidian. Its face was feline but distorted, elongated into something skeletal, with serrated mandibles protruding from either side of its mouth. Glowing yellow eyes stared out from sunken sockets, unblinking and predatory. "By the stars," Ran whispered, his voice trembling. The apex predator stood motionless, its long serpentine tail flicking behind it with unnatural grace. Thin, barbed spines jutted from its shoulders, vibrating as though they could sense the fear in the air. Zaleth's jaw tightened. "Stay still," he whispered. "It hasn't decided what we are yet." The jungle around them was silent. Everything else had fled or gone still in the presence of this perfect hunter. Tilara's breath hitched as the creature took another step forward, its massive paws sinking into the earth with terrifying softness. It exuded control. There was no rage, no frenzy, only purpose. Ran shifted slightly, and the sound of his boot scraping rock was deafening in the stillness. The creature's head snapped toward him, its pupils narrowing to slits. "Run," Zaleth commanded, his voice low but firm. "Run now." Ran bolted first, his panic overriding all logic. The rest of them followed, their suits hissing as they surged forward, hearts pounding in their chests. Tilara sprinted toward the tree line, but she could already hear it behind her. Those terrible, deliberate footsteps that were too fast, too precise. Ron screamed as the predator leapt. The sound of bones breaking was like a gunshot. Tilara caught a glimpse of his body, pinned beneath a massive paw, his helmet shattered, blood pooling in the dirt. "Keep moving," Zaleth shouted, firing a plasma burst from his gauntlet. The shot struck the creature's flank, searing its armor but barely slowing it. The predator turned toward him, its mouth curling back in a snarl. "Come on," Zaleth muttered, raising his weapon again. "You want a fight?" the creature charged. Tilara watched in horror as Zaleth held his ground. The predator collided with him, its jaws clamping onto his shoulder. He roared in pain, but managed to activate a detonation charge strapped to his wrist. The explosion was small, but powerful enough to send both of them sprawling. Zaleth hit the ground hard, gasping as blood seeped from the gaping wound in his side. The predator staggered, but didn't fall. Smoke rose from its scorched armor, and its left eye was ruined, a blackened, molten mess. But it kept moving, relentless. Tilara's instincts took over. She grabbed a sharp, broken branch from the ground and coated its tip in the remains of a venomous plant she'd collected earlier, the same toxin used by local tribes to paralyze their prey. The predator loomed over Zaleth, jaws widening for the kill. Tilara screamed, running straight at it. "Over here!" The creature hesitated, surprised by the sudden movement. She drove the sharpened branch upward with all her strength, piercing the soft tissue beneath its jaw. The creature convulsed, its body shuddering as the venom spread. For a moment she thought it would resist even that. But then its legs gave out, and it collapsed with a deafening crash. Its tail twitched once before falling still. Tilara dropped to her knees, shaking uncontrollably. The predator's massive body lay beside her, its empty eyes reflecting the moonlight. She scrambled over to Zaleth, who was barely conscious. His breath was shallow, his face pale. "It's over," she whispered, though she barely believed it. Zaleth's lips curled into a faint smile. "It's never over. Here." Above them, the sound of engines roared as the extraction vessel descended through the trees, its floodlights sweeping across the clearing. Tilara activated her beacon one last time, watching as the rescue ship hovered into place. She and the surviving student, barely able to stand, hauled Zaleth into the ship's open hatch. As they lifted off, the jungle grew smaller beneath them, shrinking into a vast, unknowable shadow. Tilara stared out the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. Her body was bruised and exhausted, but something had changed inside her. Earth had tried to break them, and it had almost succeeded. But they had survived, not by overpowering the planet's horrors, but by learning, adapting, and enduring. As the ship ascended into the sky, she whispered to herself, "Earth doesn't reward strength. It rewards those who refuse to die." Below, the jungle remained silent. The predator's lifeless form was already being reclaimed by the earth, its body dissolving into the same soil that had forged it. Life on Earth did not end, it only changed. And somewhere in the shadows, new apex predators were being shaped.